The Christmas season is a time full of lots of imagery, lots of symbolism. There's a lot of things going on, from the lights people put on their houses, on their buildings, the way we decorate things with evergreens, with Christmas trees, all sorts of things like this, to presents wrapped under the tree. There's just a lot of things going on that really hold a deeper kind of symbolism, a deeper kind of meaning. And what we're talking about tonight, when we're talking about the symbolism of Christmas, is not like the sort of shallow symbolism you might hear, like, for example, people talking about things like candy canes being shaped in a J, that symbolizes J for Jesus, or it's a shepherd's staff or something like that. This kind of like shallow, often made up or forced sort of symbolism, but rather the true kind of symbolism, which is the way in which the things we do kind of naturally arise, naturally emerge, and participate in these kind of higher patterns of things, the hierarchy of reality, really, in a lot of ways. And like I said, there's a ton of that going on with Christmas, and I thought it'd be nice to look at some of those things and just kind of um, show the symbolism of Christmas and how all of this kind of participates in this kind of cosmic dance, as it were, that we all are living in every day. Um, Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all once again to the Sacred Life. I am, of course, your host, David Baylor. It's good to have you all here tonight. It's good to join. I'm glad you could join me for this. Um, Once again, I'd like to remind everybody of our sponsor, Gregor's Iconography, which of course is me. You can check out links for that in the description. Also, I now have I've set up a new website through Shopify, so that I can actually link it to my YouTube account, and so now you'll start seeing um, actual like products from our website appearing below these videos on YouTube. So you can check that out. I appreciate it if you check out our website. Consider buying icon prints and related products as we release those. And would really appreciate it if you consider purchasing a hand painted icon or a custom icon commission. Like I said, I am the sponsor of the Sacred Life, and this is also my day job. I am an Orthodox iconographer. Um, you can also check out our Patreon that supports our animation project and other related projects that are coming up, such as our kind of, I guess we're calling it a radio drama, to tell the lives of the saints and these like these legendary stories from Christianity, and a number of other creative projects that we have going on. And of course, you can always consider becoming a channel member on if you're watching us on YouTube. And of course, super chats. I guess a cat is joining me here on stream tonight. Um, Super chat, super thanks, things like that are greatly appreciated. If you appreciate what we're doing, want to support what we're doing. And of course, that's not obligated. It's not obligated in any way. But anyway, just thought I'd mention all that. Of course, like this video, subscribe to our channel, share, help us to continue to grow. Once again, we do appreciate all of you who have subscribed already. Those of you are faithful viewers. So anyway, moving on with the topic of tonight's video. Like I said, we're talking about sort of the symbolism of Christmas, and I mentioned a few examples in the introduction that I'd like to look at in a little more detail. And like I said, instead of like this shallow kind of symbolism where these like this very superficial, um, almost like allegorical meaning. Instead, I'm looking at symbolism in the way people like the church fathers would have understood symbolism, which is like the way in which these things participate in these higher patterns, the kind of this kind of hierarchy of reality. And one thing that's really interesting about a lot of these symbols is that like atheist or more fundamentalist type of Christians might often try to point to these things and say that they are pagan, um, and want to get rid of them. And I always find that particularly interesting because what often happens. So if I'm looking at in particular this like the more fundamentalist side of Christianity that wants to get rid of everything that's not explicitly biblical, like explicitly stated in the Bible, I should say, or wants to get rid of everything that is symbolic, everything kind of along the lines of what we're talking about tonight, that they really gut Christianity and get rid of a lot of the character. And also, when we do that, we really cut ourselves off from a higher understanding of the way things work, and what is really going on in our Christian faith, what is really going on in our lives and in the world. And so I suppose that's one motivation for me looking at things like this, the symbolism of Christmas, is to help ourselves. This is a useful exercise for me, and I hope it's useful for those of you in the audience as well, to help us understand how this kind of symbolism, this kind of meaning of that is behind the things that we do, that we often just kind of take for granted. This really teaches us things about ourselves, about the world we live in, about our Christian faith, whatever it might be. So I have a few I have a few I have a few different things I'd like to look at. I picked I think 3 or 4 different symbols in particular that I wanted to look at. Before I mention that, if you're joining us live and you're in the comments, I will get to the comments later. I try to avoid kind of looking at the comments while I'm doing the presentation part of the live stream, because it can be distracting. But there'll be some time for back and forth, for some live chat, some live Q&A. At the end of the episode here tonight. So stay tuned for that if you have some questions, or if you'd like to have some conversations, or if you want to argue a little bit, whatever it might be. We will get to that later, but for now, I'm gonna go through the kind of the presentation, the talk that I've prepared, and then we'll get to that. So anyway, moving on. Like I said, I have a few things in particular that I want to look at, and these things really all kind of tie together. They're all related, and you'll see kind of how that is. So the first thing I wanted to look at was the idea of Christmas lights. We put Christmas lights. People put Christmas lights on their houses, on their plants, their trees, and things in their yards. People have Christmas trees in their houses and they decorate with lights. There's lights everywhere. That's something we've gotten accustomed to at this time of year, is there will just be lights all over the place. And there's quite a few things that I think there's quite a lot of meaning. There's quite a lot of symbolism wrapped up in light and the way that we use it in Christmas. And so I think one of the things that's immediately obvious is the fact that when we're putting up these lights, it's often one of the darkest and gloomiest times of year, when the days are getting darker and darker and darker. The weather is getting colder and colder and colder, and of course that's something in our hymnody, our hymns of the Nativity of Christ, is something that we will celebrate, like the breaking of light into the darkness of the world, which is something that happens at Christ's incarnation. And so that's part of, I think, what's going on with the symbolism of things like Christmas lights, is like this light breaking into the darkness. Then you also have like the multitude of colors. People aren't just putting like candles and white lights all over things, but they're putting colorful lights. And a lot of places are like very, very colorful. And I think you can compare this in a lot of ways with like the rainbow imagery that you have going on in the Bible. We have the rainbow. I'm thinking in particular the rainbow that we see in the book of Revelation, kind of like crowning Christ's throne. You might see it as like, yeah, this, like I said, the crowning of Christ's throne with a rainbow. And we can see this as like something like the multitude and the abundance of grace that's breaking into the world, and also like this diversity and multiplicity that's all being brought together and united in this. It's all being brought together in this kind of unity in Christ, like serving a single aim and purpose. And I think, like, just to throw in like a quick mention, like people like to try to kind of invert the symbolism of the rainbow. Of course, if we're thinking of things like pride and using the rainbow as a symbol there, that's actually kind of an inversion of this symbolism, what I would see as like the biblical and patristic symbol of the rainbow. So I'll just throw that in there real briefly and not really talk about it here. Maybe we'll talk about that some other time if you want me to. But there's like this striking kind of beauty in this proclamation of light in the cold and the darkness of winter that I think is really pointing towards this triumph of the light with the birth of Christ. We might think of this as, this is just a nice a nice custom that we have because, of course, it's getting dark and the lights look good with the snow and all those things. But Christmas really is, it really is on a lot of ways the season of light and the festival of lights, and it's not. I don't think it should be seen entirely as coincidental or accidental that the Christmas season and the timing of the Christmas holiday lines up typically with the Jewish festival of lights of Hanukkah. There's kind of a type there. The Hanukkah, in case you're not, in case you're not familiar, commemorates the events from the Book of Maccabees with the Maccabean revolt. And I don't need to go into the history of Hanukkah because this isn't a Hanukkah episode, but yeah, so it's not entirely incidental, coincidental, or accidental that those coincide. That imagery of light is, of course, very, very important in the symbolism of Christmas. So I think also there's a lot of this imagery with the lights also ties in, like it brings into mind, something like the stars. When we place these lights, these little points of light all over the place, and we decorate our houses with them, we decorate our yards, we decorate our trees, whatever it might be with all of these lights. Of course, this is going to bring to mind the cosmic powers, the stars in the sky, which when you think of the stars in the sky, you should be thinking also of the cosmic power, the angelic hosts, and everything like that, as ancient people did, as the text of scripture does. And I think this segues nicely into symbolism of the star. Because when we're thinking of this idea of like the heavenly powers bowing down to worship Christ and to declare the glory and the wonder of his nativity. And so this, like, again, segues nicely into the symbolism of the star. We think about, we'll take the star and put it on top of a Christmas tree. I live out here in the country, and there's farmers around that will put a star on the top of like their grain bins, and things like that. Like on the highest point that they have. You'll see that a lot in towns, at least around here in the Midwest as well. During this time of year, you'll see this star placed at the highest, most visible place where people can see it. So of course, this brings to mind the star that guided the Magi in the nativity account in the gospel. But that itself also points towards the deeper symbolism in terms of stars and what stars represent. So this is, on the one hand, something like the crowning of Christ with this kind of heavenly glory, this declaration of his godhood and of his glory. Of course, we put a star on top of the Christmas tree, like I said, and some people, growing up, like for example, we always put an angel on top of the star. So some people put an angel on the star, and some people, I think, see the star as like a secular thing, and the angel as more of the proper Christian thing. But you really need to understand that the angel and the star are symbolically actually the same thing. So the idea of the star being set at the highest point is very, very significant. The idea of a star, like the idea of being guided by the star, is also very, very closely related to that. And that is something that has been imagined in a lot of different ways throughout Christian history. What does it mean that the star was guided by the Magi? Some people imagine it as like this thing moving, and they're following it, and it's leading them through the wilderness. Some people interpret it as, well, they read the stars, they read the signs in the skies and interpreted them. There's all kinds of different interpretations of that, and that ambiguity, that kind of ambiguity that exists in our minds, it's, I don't know. It just kind of really works with the symbolism of what you might think it means to be guided by these kind of angelic powers. And these angelic powers, of course, again, this relating to this, to putting the star up in this high place, like pointing to this idea of the whole world being guided by the stars, by the angelic powers, and ultimately by the saints who, join these angelic ranks in a way to the worship of Christ, to the recognition of Christ's glory and his divinity, and of the incarnation of God. And then, of course, relating to the star, also we have the tree, the Christmas tree. You think of this as like an evergreen tree. It doesn't matter, I should say, especially when we're talking about the Christmas tree, like it really doesn't matter the origins of it. If you want to think this is a pagan thing, if you want to think this is a Protestant German thing, that's really not very important, because what's important is the symbolism and the meaning of it. And that's something that, as Christians, we're uniquely able to do, is to take things and to see the truth and the goodness contained within them, and to claim them and to redeem them and put them to the glory of God and of his church, to put them, I guess you could say, I would say, to their proper use. So even if, they come from something like paganism, or they come from what you might think of as a questionable source, as some people think things like Christmas trees do, and some of these other things with the Christmas holiday, like that sort of doesn't matter, because we're taking something out of this improper place and putting it back in its, or we're putting it in its proper place, I should say. So anyway, we think of this idea of an evergreen tree as, like, the thing that does not die during the season of winter, but kind of retains this appearance of life, this outward appearance of life. It stays green. And so, of course, the use of greenery and of evergreens is a central motif that we see throughout the Christmas season, the Christmas holiday. Decorating our houses and things with garlands, limbs, bows, and stuff from evergreen trees, and it's relating to this idea of life. And this is, of course, tying to one of the most important themes of the celebration of Christ's nativity, which is like life breaking into the world that had fallen into corruption and had become subject to death and decay. And of course, this is something that early Christian authors and figures like Saint Athanasius of Alexandria see as particularly important with the nativity of Christ, with the incarnation of God, is this idea of mankind becoming subject to death and decay, and to falling into corruption, and life needing to be restored, the image of Christ needing to be recapitulated. And so, of course, the use of this evergreen imagery is very, very closely tied to that. But I think it's also it's really, really fitting also with the Christmas holiday, that in order for the tree, the Christmas tree, to be brought into our homes and be decorated, and you might say to be put to its this kind of higher use, it has to be cut down and killed. It has to give up its own life in order to serve this higher function. And of course, that's very, very appropriate in terms of Christian symbolism. In terms of the Christian story. And then another thing as well, along with that, is this idea, we'll place presents under the tree, and this idea of presents as being something that, typically we'll keep whatever the presents we get for, whether it's our children, our loved ones, our friends, coworkers, whatever it might be, the presents, we wrap them in paper, and what they are is a secret. People don't know, like, we keep this from them, it's hidden. The true nature of what this thing is concealed, and it's hidden, and then it's as it were revealed with the unwrapping of the gifts in our Christmas celebration. Right. Of course, I think you can try to you can nitpick about this that if you want, and say, oh, the presents traditionally are part of the celebration of St. Nicholas Day and not of Christmas or something like that, attached to some other holiday. But of course, those things all relate to the broader Christmas season. And then also there's kind of a reason why the gift giving tradition has been assimilated over time to the nativity feast. Um, Now, there's something in this idea of the presence being, wrapped up and concealed with the mystery of God's incarnation and of his dwelling in the womb of the Virgin. And also why it is that we celebrate the feast of the incarnation of Christ's nativity, that we celebrate the birth of Christ as, this is the, like I said, the incarnation, the feast of the festival of his incarnation. We celebrate the birth of Christ instead of the Annunciation. The Annunciation being where we traditionally see the conception to have happened. When the angel appears to the Virgin and tells her of these things. Um, why is it that we don't celebrate God coming into creation then? Why is it that we wait until birth? Because there is this idea that even though the life begins at conception, but that life is wrapped up in a mantle, as it were. It's concealed, it's hidden, and it's secret, and it's not revealed to the world, and you don't really know it. You don't really understand the nature of it until it is revealed through birth. And of course, I'm saying like the symbolism of the presence, the symbolism of them being wrapped and concealed. There's a way in which it kind of relates to that. So those are a few examples of this kind of symbolism that's going on in the Christmas celebration. Like I said, like this is a season that is very, very rich in this kind of symbolism. I hope that kind of helps you understand sort of how these things that we participate in and even oftentimes take for granted, they will very, very naturally align with these deeper inherent patterns of reality. And so I don't think it's stretching or grasping at straws or making illegitimate connections to point at these symbolism this kind of way, because the things that we do participate in, in the patterns of reality and in the higher order of things, and the things that participate in that the most are the things that abide and the things that are passed down and refined over time. And then, of course, the things that don't line up with these higher levels of reality will eventually fall out of memory, fall out of practice, fall into obscurity, because they're less connected to reality. They're less connected to the divine hierarchy. Um, so that is what I have for that's what I have prepared for tonight. There's a lot more I could go into in terms of the symbolism, but I don't think it's necessary for me to have this I don't think it's necessary for me to have this, I don't know, like exhaustive discussion of every single symbol in the Christmas holiday. Um, So if there's people tuned in that would like to join in on the conversation, have some questions, leave some comments. This at this time I'll do some Q&A, things like that. Not a super active chat section tonight. Least active I've had in a long time. But if anybody has any questions, I do have one comment here from Ian, who says it is funny that Maccabees isn't canon, but it's the most celebrated Jewish holiday worldwide. Um, well, so I mean, I'm not quite sure how to answer that. It's not. Yeah, I know it's not technically canon for modern Jews. It is canon, of course, for Orthodox and Catholic Christians, for the majority of Christians worldwide. Um, but the simple fact of the matter is the book of Maccabees commemorates real events, and of course the point of celebration, like we don't necessarily have to have something like explicitly spelled out in the page of scripture to have a celebration of it, because we're celebrating the way in which God has acted in history, acted in the world. And of course Maccabees, these are things that really happened. God really did rescue his people at that time. So of course it's something that you would celebrate. But then there's also an element to that in which, as I understand it as well, Hanukkah as it exists today is kind of a modern creation. Um, and isn't historically in what we would think of as modern Judaism quite as important as it is to Jews today. But anyway, I'm not seeing a lot of comments. That's fine. I'm happy. I'm more than happy to sign off. Um, I'd like to thank you all for joining us tonight, or for joining me tonight. I hope you got something out of it. I hope this kind of helps you to understand the way these kind of symbols work, that they play out and kind of manifest themselves in our world. Why there's a reason why we do the sort of things that we do. So until next time, I'd like to wish you all once again peace in Christ.